Travis, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So Travis Dickinson, and I guess my primary role is I teach philosophy at Dallas Baptist University. Also write books, and I was going to flash my newest book, but I didn't have it ready apparently. But just had this one come out, Wandering Toward God and Finding Faith Amid Doubts and Big Questions, and hopefully that endears me a little to your audience. And I assume you've got a mixed audience, but at least some in the audience that because I'm saying in the book that we should doubt, it's okay to doubt, and that there's value in doubting our faith. And now I think faith, Christian faith provides good answers, but nonetheless, I think that it's a good thing to doubt. So that's what the book is about, wandering toward God. But I also speak and as I said, write, and Christian. I hold to the historic claims of Christian faith, and yeah, it's one of the most important things of my life.
Cool. So I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that there's no evidence that indicates the existence of God. I think that everything is best explained by naturalism. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are for belief in a God, and specifically Christianity? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on my interpretation of those.
Yeah. So I come down to it in a particular way. And I'm sure you've debated all these particular ways. So as I was reflecting on the drive here, and I should say too, I don't. I have caught your videos here and there, but I don't know a lot about you. So I do hope to sort of get to know your views a bit better than that, because what you said there could go a lot of different directions, as mine could as well. So, but so I thought, just as I was thinking about how to go this morning, I was thinking that to kind of go in a bit of a unique route. For me, I think that I've really come to the place where I think that naturalism may not make sense at all. Like, it may not be. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the distinction between metaphysical possibility and logical possibility. So it's clearly logically possible. It's clearly not a straight contradiction to say. And again, this is where you can feel free to fill in any excuse me, details for your particular brand of naturalism. But it's, the typical sort of statement of naturalism, I think, is coherent, logically coherent. But I'm not sure. I'm kind of come to this place where I think it may not be metaphysically coherent or metaphysically possible. And what I mean by that is, and I should say too, that when I heard someone say this kind of thing early on in my journey, excuse me, I thought it was crazy too, probably the way you're thinking of it right now too. But as I really reflected on it, I think that it makes some sense, and it's actually a pretty good starting place to talk about these issues, because the typical arguments and sort of features of reality that we look to come to the conclusion that God exists sort of flow out of this statement. And so here's the kind of idea, is that when we think about the natural world, when we think about, again, just kind of what it is as we find it, right? I'm not sure. I'm convinced that it needs a metaphysical ground. I'm convinced that there has to be some foundation, something that sort of, I guess the word would just be that grounds its reality. And I'm not sure, just natural properties all the way down at the end of the day make sense in that way. So we need something. And so, the short of it, this is a quite ancient, of course, claim, going all the way back to the pre-Socratics, where if you look at the pre-Socratics, they sort of, they just tried everything. It was sort of what can be, it could be water, it could be, fire, all these various things that could be the sort of foundation of reality. But I think the thing that makes most sense to me is that there's a mind that is transcendent, that grounds all of reality, and makes it in a way a necessary, right? It has to be this sort of like necessary existent, and you just don't have a lot of options at that point. Maybe something like mathematical facts or logical facts would be these sort of necessary truths, at least, but whether or not those can ground reality, I'm just not sure. God's, for me, fits the bill.
So then my first question is, metaphysics is essentially just understood as the fundamental nature of reality. And so metaphysical naturalism is the position that nature is metaphysics. So I disagree that there has to be a metaphysical grounds of reality. I totally agree. Metaphysics is, this is what existence is. Ontology is a branch of metaphysics. So obviously there has to be some metaphysical existence, but I don't see why it couldn't be natural.
No,
I
I'm
don't see
saying that the
why.
natural world needs this sort of metaphysical grounding. That was the claim. Sorry.
Right, but I don't understand why the natural world can't be the metaphysical grounding, because one of the most prominent views is metaphysical naturalism. So nature is the metaphysical grounding. So metaphysics is just the fundamental nature of reality, whatever that is. It's metaphysics. So yes, I agree. There has to be a metaphysical grounds, but why not? Why think that's more than natural?
Yeah. Yeah, because when you think about, and this is where again you get to the arguments, the more classical arguments, Aquinas's five ways, and all the way through to Bill Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, and so on. You get all these features that don't seem to be metaphysically foundational, right? So you have the natural world is a world of contingency, a world of, again, just think of all the various cosmological arguments. The natural world is a world in motion, a world in flux. It's changing. It's finite. Especially if that's, and again, I'm not saying you would necessarily grant all these properties, but these seem to be pretty plausible, and a lot of people think that these are features of the natural world. And the claim would then be, these can't be metaphysically foundational. There needs to be something that grounds these kind of things, like the finitude of the universe, of course, is one that a lot of apologists talk about, and philosophers. Right, that would be, take that just as an example. It's to
The
say, sorry,
finitude, as in the no past infinite regression finitude, because
yeah, something like
I
that.
think the consensus is that the universe is infinite in physics, both temporally and spatially.
I don't know if that's consensus, but again, we can pick any of these. Doesn't need to be one that everybody agrees with.
Right. So my general question
Yeah,
to you would be: is what is an example of something you think is better explained by non-naturalism?
the contingency of the universe.
Why do you think the universe is contingent?
Um, I think I would go from something. I mean, it seems plausibly contingent. I guess I'd start there to say that's the way it seems, and I think, yeah. I mean, it didn't. There's no necessity that attaches to it. So I mean, I think this again kind of comes back to how we make these distinctions, of course, of how we get to anything's being necessary or contingent. And I think I guess I would just say that when we look at the universe, it exhibits all the properties of contingency.
So, like, why would the necessary being be a god as opposed to a quantum field?
Well, because I think it doesn't ultimately ground the features that we find. So here again, we sort of get back into the features of it. Something like so I guess let me back up a little bit even more. When I kind of go from my epistemological approach, it's going to be something like Descartes. I'm going to start Descartes with something like, if I start to kind of go to his project where I doubt everything that I could possibly doubt, what I realize is that I can't doubt that I exist, and then that I'm a thinking thing, and then I begin to notice features, and this is where I sort of depart from Descartes, but that would be the fundamental starting place epistemologically,
I would
is that
agree.
I exist as a thinking thing, and then I start to consider my sort of phenomenal experience and so on. So that makes, I mean, we're already probably outside of the natural world there, because I don't think that conscious experience exhibits it falls neatly, at least cleanly, within the natural uh, world category.
I don't quite understand that argument because any phenomenon that exists or that we experience would fall into a category of the known stuff or the unknown stuff. And the known stuff, the natural stuff, is in the known stuff category. And the unknown stuff doesn't have a category. It's just the unknown stuff. And so if consciousness would either fall into the category of the natural stuff, where it would be known, or it'd be the unknown, which could just also be a form of unknown natural. And so it would naturally be able to fit into the category of natural because there's no reason for it not to. Simply saying that none of the known natural things have the property of qualia experience or something doesn't imply that qualia experience is not natural. It'd be like saying, affirming the consequent, that um, we don't know of any examples of a blue object, therefore blue cannot be. It's not the case. The fact that we don't know of any doesn't mean it's not natural or it's not the case. So why assume that consciousness isn't an unknown natural thing simply
Yeah, what do you
because
mean by natural? Maybe that'd be helpful for you to say what you mean by natural then, because it sounds like
unguided.
if it's just what is known, then yeah, of course, the consciousness will fall within the natural category, but it surely can't just be what is known.
Oh, so I'd say it's unguided physical forces, so not things guided by a mind. So my matter and energy and motion is what I'd call natural, and I'd contrast that to supernatural, which would be a non-physical mind guiding stuff, something along those lines.
Yeah, so your mind, then, your conscious experience, seems to me with that definition would fall within the supernatural, because you are guiding, your mind is guiding your thoughts and your volitions and your decisions and things like that.
Well, I think it's physical, so I'd say non-physical consciousness would be like the supernatural, whereas physical consciousness would not be. I'd put that in the natural category.
Yeah, why think it's physical though?
Because of all the inductive evidence of physical things we have that exist in the world, and so it seems like, given the fact of how we know about physics goes into chemistry, and chemistry goes into biology, biology goes into brains, and brains seem to produce consciousness, and we have no examples of consciousness that exist outside of brains, and interacting with brains seems to have a phenomenally profound effect on consciousness and not the other way around, seems to infer that the primacy of matter as opposed to consciousness, and that consciousness is an emergent property of matter.
Yeah, so what's the inductive evidence for the physical though? That was what you started with. What's that
Inductive
inductive
evidence for
evidence?
the physical. I'm not sure what you mean.
That's what you said. So that's what I'm just asking you to clarify. I
Well,
had said, what are the reasons to think that it's physical? And you said the inductive evidence of all the physical.
so like the physical world around us is a hypothesis, and it makes testable predictions, and those testable predictions are confirmed, which is evidence that it's real.
Yeah, but
So
what would be the reason to think that it's physical,
because
other
that's what
than a phenomenal?
well, that's what the hypothesis states. So you can state anything you want in a starting hypothesis, and if that hypothesis makes predictions and those predictions are true, you then have evidence to believe the hypothesis.
Okay, so I don't mean to, and we don't need to get completely bogged down on this point, but I'm just not hearing any, uh, reasons to think that it is physical. Therefore, I mean, so are you just saying that that's your starting place? That's a sort of assumption you're making, that when we
No,
have conscious experience of the world, that you take, say you're standing in front of a tree, you have visual experience of a tree, that's your conscious experience, and then you are inferring from that the physical world exists.
no, evidence for me is the ability to accurately predict the future. So if you have a hypothesis magical sky pixie named Bob created the world 5 minutes ago. And if you have this hypothesis and that hypothesis can predict the future experiences better than any other hypothesis, then the fact that you are able to predict future experiences more accurately with this hypothesis than any other is reason to believe any of the assumptions in that hypothesis. So I
And
can
so
make
with the
any
physical,
hypothesis I want, whatever things you want.
yeah,
God killed 6,000 years ago.
right,
If he did, the Bible says X, Y, Z.
yeah.
And if those things happen, it's reason to believe everything in the Bible, no matter how ridiculous.
So, but I guess what I'm saying is, how do we know that the physical exists over and above something like the evil demon?
Again, it's the novel testable prediction. So if I have a hypothesis there's an evil demon, and a hypothesis I'm in the real physical world, and one of these allows me to infer future information that I get correctly, whichever one does that, I'm justified to believe.
And so, how would it do that better than the evil demon hypothesis? Because
Um,
that's the kind of trick. I mean, not trick, but
well, in my mind,
that's
one of them
the
does, one of them
task.
doesn't. So in my mind, one of them does, one of them doesn't, and that's what makes one of them justified and one of them not. So if in your mind it was the other case, the other would be justified for you. So it's simply the fact that if you have a hypothesis that allows you to predict the future, whatever that is, you are justified in believing it. It isn't proof. You don't need infallible knowledge, but it
Right,
gives
right,
you a
right.
justification.
No, I agree. But what I don't mean to keep pressing it, but what is the prediction that makes the hypothesis that the physical world exists successful over and above that the evil demon is giving me all these experiences?
I hypothesize there is a physical world, and because I hypothesize there's a physical world, when I touch my PlayStation controller, it will turn the PlayStation on. When I touch the PlayStation controller, it does turn the PlayStation on. I am now justified in believing I'm in the physical world.
Oh, okay. So it's just a matter of, so I mean, it could be anything. It could be,
Well, I'd go with
I mean,
science technically, but yeah, it could be
you're
anything.
not seeing. So is it justified? Is it justified to a greater degree than, say, the evil demon hypothesis?
Yes, because the evil demon
Why?
hypothesis does not make successful predictions in my mind.
When you say in your mind, what do you mean?
It means like when I compare the two hypotheses and try to use them to infer things about the future, one of them allows me to do that. One of them does not allow me to
Okay,
do that.
great. So how does it not? How does the evil demon hypothesis fall short?
Because in my mind, the evil demon does not allow me to predict the future. I do not have a
Why not?
cognizant model of the evil demon that works to predict the future.
See, I mean, I think that's Descartes' point in a lot of ways, is that when you're thinking about physical objects, I mean, this is why I think Descartes is. I mean, a lot of people give Descartes a hard time, and there's reasons to do that. But this is why I like Descartes, because what he does is he gets us in this like really almost, as he would put it, indubitable way. He gets us to conscious experience, but the worry is always with Descartes is that you can't then get to the physical world, because if you have conscious experiences, then those things are just as likely. They predict everything. It could just be that the evil demon does it in a very consistent and kind of repeatable and nomologically consistent way, where you can't rule that out just by viewing the experience. And that's where
But I
Descartes.
don't need to. So I think you're
Oh, I thought
confusing.
you said not rule out in a like completely, with certainty, but just, or infallible way. But just, you said that you're more justified in believing that the physical world exists over that the evil demon world exists. And I haven't yet heard why. You just said the one is more predictable than the other, but I haven't. That's Descartes', kind of revenge in a way, is that it's not. I mean, it could be just as predictable as the physical world would be.
Yeah. So the argument isn't that it makes different predictions. It's not, underdetermination is a thing. There's infinitely many theories that will predict any amount of data. So that
Yeah.
doesn't matter. What matters is which one in your brain does. And so if there's a guy next to me and his brain has the evil demon hypothesis and it makes all the same predictions mine does, he's justified in believing that he is in being deluded by an evil demon. In my
that's
brain,
fair enough. But I'm just trying to get to how it does for your brain, if you want to put it that way. How does it in your brain privilege or sort of make, how is the thesis that the physical world exists more successful than the evil demon hypothesis? And again, I think what you said is that it better predicts the world, but I'm not hearing how, and that's really where I think Descartes' project makes lots of trouble, because you can just imagine anything with the evil demon doing the exact same things that you would experience if just the physical world existed.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. So like anybody can start with any random hypothesis.
No,
So
I
if
know.
imagine a billion people and they all have
I'm
different
talking about in your
hypotheses.
brain.
Wait. Try to
Okay,
slow
sorry.
down. Just go a little slower here. So if any person makes up a hypothesis in their brain, doesn't matter what it is,
Okay.
and they predict things about the future and they get it right. Whatever the hypothesis is, even if infinitely many others make the exact same predictions, that person is justified in believing the one they believed. And that's it. They need nothing more. There's no other justification. You don't need to predict more things. If you have a starting belief, whatever it is, and it makes predictions and you get them right, you are justified in believing that belief, no matter what the other beliefs also predict. So even if that guy has a different set of beliefs that makes the same predictions and he's justified in believing the alternative hypothesis, I didn't start with that. I started with mine, and mine made the predictions. And since I'm aware of mine and believe mine, and mine works coherently with my worldview and it corresponds to reality and my ability to like experience things, I am justified in believing that. So simply the fact that I have a hypothesis, which could be arbitrary, doesn't matter what the hypothesis is, doesn't matter if alternatives make the same predictions or not. If I start with a hypothesis and it works, I'm justified in believing that hypothesis, no matter what it is. I don't need to exclude others. I don't need to make different predictions than others. The other guy can make it exactly the same predictions with a different hypothesis, and he can be justified in that position totally fine. The only thing I need is I have a hypothesis and a belief, makes predictions, and they're correct. And whatever that belief is, it's justified for me.
Okay. And so then what if you have two hypotheses that you're trying to decide between? How do you work that out? And those both make equal predictions, and are equally for you in your brain well justified.
Then they would be equally well justified. You can just pick whichever one you want if you want. I don't have that.
Yeah, and I guess what I was trying to press you for is why not? Why isn't the evil demon just as successful? But we can move on. We don't need to keep.
It's not as coherent. It's not a world. I did not use that to make the predictions that I made
But
in my
how
life.
is it not? That's what I'm.
I did not use it to make the predictions.
Okay, so just as a matter of fact, you're choosing the physical world's existence and naturalism over something like a evil demon or a sort of idealist view or something to that effect. And it's because for you, as you worked it out, as a matter of fact, not as like all things considered, it just happened to make more coherent sense for you.
Well, it works. So I had a hypothesis, made predictions, and it worked. And so
Okay,
I'm
so
justified
not
in believing
necessarily
that.
true, but
Idealism is separate, because idealism, the worldview seems to make alternative predictions that are false. Now you can ad hoc it and try and make it fit, but it seems like the primacy of matter over mind is very well established. And if idealism was true, you'd expect the opposite to be the case. So there's good reasons to reject idealism. Brain in the vat hypothesis could make the same predictions. It just seems to be, it doesn't have any utility to it. You wouldn't expect there to be any uniformity to that world. It would be ad hoc, whereas mine is, you would expect uniformity and you get predictions out of it. And so I like that hypothesis better. And so I used it to make predictions and they worked. And so I'm justified in believing that.
So but are you happy to say that it works, not necessarily that it's true, or like it's just justified for you in your brain? That's what I hear you're saying.
Well, if it works, I would be justified to believe it's true. That's what justification means.
Okay.
So I mean, I can't prove it's true with certainty,
yeah,
but I don't need to.
But works, being tied to justification is, of course, not is a pretty controversial view.
Well, all of them are. All of the truth claims are in philosophy.
Sure. Yeah, and I would push back to say that I don't think that matter being having a kind of primacy is the dominant view out there. I think it is a major player, but it's certainly not the dominant view. I mean, when you consider all the theists and all the people who believe in God, I mean, that's got to figure in to the equation. And so, yeah, I don't buy it. And it really wouldn't matter to me if it would. And I don't think it would matter to you, or it shouldn't matter to you, given what you've just said, because you're sort of putting everything within your own brain and how it works for you. So how it works for other people, it seemed to me that you were diminishing the value of the person next to you who comes to it, and not in a bad way, but just saying like that's fine. That's for you. That's fine. If somebody next to you sees the evil demon hypothesis as working for them, that's fine for them.
Yeah, if they have a different model and they make predictions,
Yeah.
that's correct. But I would push back on the Phil Survey's paper. There have been a number of published polls on academics of every relevant field, and physics definitely all physical predominantly. Very few of anybody believes in the spiritual side. Neurology, 99 something percent all physical. Um, Philosophy, I think it's more split, but I still think the vast majority are physicalists. I think it's like in the 60s, 70s range. So I think in most academic fields, the predominant view is physicalism.
Of some sort or other, probably. But again, in the broader world, I I mean, again, but this doesn't matter to me so much because I'm Descartes. I'm starting with, I mean, I'm not Descartes, but I'm Cartesian in this sense that I'm starting with my own existence.
You are literally Descartes.
Yeah, right. Now we're really off. Starting with my own existence, I have conscious experience. And then anyway, so maybe we push on a little bit, but I don't think we ever necessarily, I believe in the physical world, so I'm not an idealist. But I think that one thing that I love about Descartes is that what we come to realize we know best is our own conscious experiences. And I think and again, maybe this just works for me in my own brain, or what I would say in my own mind, is that conscious experience is non-natural. That's where we were. I think that's where we were sort of departed from the discussion there a little bit. So to get back to that, I think as we reflect on, I think it's clearly non-natural in the sense, not natural as in being known or being, sort of testable, but natural being something like the way it's often defined actually is like testable by science. And we really can't test for conscious experience itself. We can test for brain activity, but I can't know exactly what's going on in your mind if you have a mind. But there are ways in which I can know what's going on in your brain and so on. And so I think what we know best is our conscious experience, and those, as we, again, it's definitional in a way, like how we're going to define natural. But
yeah, I wanted to ask about that. So
yeah,
you said defined as not testable by science. That
sorry,
seems to lead to some very strange contradictions, because a lot of things in science aren't testable by science, like antiparticles aren't testable in a lot of ways. Black holes aren't testable. Is that supernatural? Like, no,
yeah,
I don't think anybody in science would say that.
No. I should have said something like discoverable or something to that effect by science.
Discover. Well, I mean, that one's I think is also is strange, because then like string theory, many worlds hypothesis just would be supernatural, and I don't think anybody thinks those are supernatural. I think that a more contemporary definition of natural would be as ruled by something like the laws of physics, so unguided natural forces.
That's
And
fine.
so it's not really it's discoverable, but more like guided by the natural forces of the universe, as opposed to like intentionality or
Yeah, I don't like the
some
word
other
guided, but
ontology.
I don't like the word guided there, but I think that's in the same neighborhood, that it's again by physics, so it's going to be by science that we come to know these things, something to that effect.
Well, I think the epistemology is irrelevant there, because natural is like an ontology question. What is it made of? And we want to say it's made of something analogous to matter and energy, just like a force field, something. That's it, as opposed to like a mind or magic or some kind of alternative ontology other than the stuff that we currently know about through matter and energy. So I think natural is usually defined as analogous to something made of pretty much matter and energy, or some constituent of matter and energy.
Mhm.
And supernatural would be as a new kind of ontology beyond the matter and energy stuff.
And I think that's fine. I think we can go with that. And when I reflect upon my conscious experience, I don't find matter and energy.
Why?
Because it's not there. I don't even know. I can hypothesize that matter and energy exist on the basis of my conscious experience. But when I reflect on my conscious experience, whatever it might be, thinking about the tree that's outside my window, let's say, or I've stubbed my toe and I'm, in pain. It's the hurtfulness of that pain that I'm aware of directly in that sense. And then I can hypothesize that there's a material physical world tree that's outside my window here. And I can hypothesize that there was a brick that I tripped on or something and stubbed my toe, but that's all inferences from what I know in my own conscious experience.
All right, so I would agree there. I would say that when we see any given object, we don't see matter or energy. Like nobody sees matter or energy in its essence or form.
Okay.
But the question is if we start with any given object, we can ask the question: is it fundamental, or is it an emergent property that's a composite of some other more fundamental thing? And of those two, it doesn't seem like we have any reason to think that consciousness or any new object we ever discover would be one of the fundamental things, as opposed to being a composite. And if it's a composite, there's no reason to think it couldn't be a composite of matter. Obviously, it may be hard to understand how matter could combine in such a way to create certain properties like consciousness or quality experience, but that isn't actually an argument it can't happen. That just means you can't imagine how it could happen. And so there could be an undiscovered law of physics that allows it to happen. And so there's no reason to think it couldn't just be physical in a new way that we haven't discovered yet.
Yeah, I think I would say literally the opposite. I think I would say that we have no reason to think that matter and energy are at bottom. Because again, what we know best is that we have conscious experience. There's no way to inspect it and say, oh, look, there's matter and energy at bottom here, and that it's some sort of emergent property. I think we can hypothesize that, but again, how it presents to us, I would, assume our conscious experiences are, somewhat uniform across humanity. I have no reason to think that matter is at the bottom of it.
I'm not sure I follow that reasoning. So, like, I would say that obviously we start with conscious experience epistemologically, so epistemological solipsism, as you mentioned. But that doesn't. There's nothing about that we could infer consciousness is fundamental. It tells us nothing whether or not it's fundamental or a composite. It gives us no indication one way or the other. And then from the I think therefore I am, we can say there's some difference between the certain kinds of things I'm experiencing. I can experience a TV when I look in front of me. I can experience a unicorn when I imagine a unicorn. But there's clearly some difference between these two things. One seems to be experiential, one seems to be imaginary. So we need some way to differentiate of our experiences, which ones are the experiential kind and which ones are the imaginary kind. And from that, we get the scientific method, essentially. And the scientific method, very good at this, has demonstrated that there are lots of things out there that are way beyond what we would expect. We didn't imagine these first. We discovered them: particles, neutrons, neutrinos, atoms, quarks, quantum fields, blah, 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 lots of things. And there seems to be a hierarchy that we can test: physics, chemistry, biology, brains, consciousness. And consciousness seems to only appear in brains. And when we want to mess with consciousness, we mess with brains. But we can't do the other way around. So if we wanted to assume, let's say, that consciousness was fundamental and brains were superlative to consciousness, we should be able to do things like mess with the physical world with our brains without having to go through a physical medium like hands.
No,
so,
you
like,
can.
if I could use the
can.
force, if I could use the force and pick
Well,
up
not
a
the
TV
force,
remote,
but
well, just to, like, to go with my analogy, if I could use the force and pick up a TV remote with my mind powers, that would be really good evidence that consciousness was more fundamental than matter, because consciousness could influence matter in a way that wasn't via the means of a physical
Okay,
meat sack in my
good, good.
brain.
Let me just jump in.
Right.
So I don't think necessarily that consciousness, when it comes to the human person, I think this is where we maybe are talking past each other a little bit. I'm not committed to the idea that consciousness is more fundamental than, say, matter in our bodies and so on. I would be a substance dualist where these are sort of conjoined in a way, so that there is causal direction both ways, though. But clearly, we can affect the brains. I mean, this is like for a child to go through trauma, to experience fear over and over and over again, which would be conscious experience of fear, has major impact on the brain in various ways.
Yeah, but if consciousness was fundamental to reality, we would be able to interact with things more than just the brain. If we can only interact with the brain, like if I say like an electrical socket was plugged into an electrical outlet, if I can jiggle the outlet and I can move the socket, well, obviously it's like there's a one-way connection. But if we want to see one's more fundamental than the other, then it should be able to mess with the other stuff in the house, not just
Yeah,
the electrical
but
outlet.
that's what I'm saying. I'm not committed to the idea that one is more fundamental to the other in terms of the human person. That's why I think we kind of slid into a discussion of philosophy of mind here. I'm making the claim that the divine mind serves as the proper sort of metaphysical grounding of all reality. So that's one claim. And then as we started, kind of went into Descartes a little, and we started, I think, therefore I am. And I was just making the point that our conscious experience is what we know best. And what the point that I'm building to, haven't quite got there yet, which is totally fine, is that I think without God on that picture, then I don't know that I'm kind of Descartes this way too, is that if we don't have God, then we can't rule out the evil demon, right? We don't have more justification. But so that's a whole other thing. But right now we're talking about, kind of in the middle of that, we're talking about the philosophy of mind, of how to understand the human person. And I would say, kind of just focusing on what we know best, which is, again, I think part of the upshot of Descartes' meditations and other parts of Descartes, is that we know we're thinking things, like we know conscious experience best. And I don't think that that's in a way, like more fundamental to the human person. I think they're both there, and I think there's that two-way causality that's clearly the case, that we can, even if you just all of a sudden somebody, came at you in an aggressive way, sitting there in your overstuffed chair or whatever, like you would probably start to have physical manifestations of that fear that you're experiencing. Your heart rate would rise, your eyes would widen, you might start to perspire, those kind of things. Like those are physical manifestations of conscious experience itself. So I'm just saying there's clearly it's not the way I think you were describing it, as only we can mess with the physical and that has, conscious experience results. We can mess with the conscious experience and have physical results too.
So I was agreeing with that, but what I don't really care. The person doesn't matter. What I care about is which is more fundamental to reality.
Okay.
So we want to figure out which is like, is there a hierarchy? Are consciousness and matter at the same level fundamentally in reality, or is one higher than the other in reality? And to do that, we do it in the same way we like stacking cards. If we knock down the bottom cards, all of them fall. If we knock down the top cards, the rest on the bottom are fine. They're not really affected. And so we can do a hierarchy assessment of, can we mess with consciousness by messing with the brain? Yes. Can we mess with the other stuff, like in reality, by messing with the physical matter stuff? Yes. I can blow stuff up with TNT just fine. Don't need any consciousness for that. Can I use consciousness to affect anything outside of the brain without a physical medium? No. So
Wait,
now it seems
mean?
like
Explain that a little
force.
more.
Like can I use the force? Can I use my mind powers to do stuff in reality without using a hand?
Why isn't me raising my arm, me using conscious experience to have a physical result?
That's what I was trying to get with the plug analogy. If the order of operations starts with the consciousness goes to the brain, and I can't go from consciousness to TV, that means that the hierarchy starts with the matter, not the other way around. So the top layer of the cards is the consciousness, then it has to go to the brain, which is the next one, then it has to go to the hand, then it has to go to the TV remote. Now, if I could just go consciousness TV remote, that's really good evidence that the consciousness is one of the lower levels of the cards. I don't need all this like strange, weird stuff from the brain to the hand to that. That's all very arbitrarily weird and small. But I can do that with the matter. I can skip all the other steps and just go TNT, blow up TV. I don't need to go all this random steps between my biological functions. And so it seems very good evidence that the order of operations is matter first, consciousness is a result of matter. So it's like physics, chemistry, biology, brains, consciousness, and not the other way around. But if we could manipulate things with the force, consciousness, force power, that would be great evidence of consciousness being more than just a result of brains.
Yeah, I don't think human consciousness is more fundamental. So I think we're just sort of off on a place that, in other words, I'm not committed to
so I wanted to go back to
thesis that consciousness as a general category is more fundamental than, in other words, all consciousness is more fundamental than matter. I mean, maybe in some sense I'd be committed to that, but I'm just saying that God, who is the divine mind, for the purpose of this discussion, serves as the metaphysical ground of reality as we find it. Now, where do we find it? I think we find it with reflecting on our conscious experiences, and we find a whole lot of features there that I think are best explained by a divine mind.
Well, so I was starting with the cogito, just my consciousness. I don't have access to God's consciousness.
Right.
So with just my consciousness, we can do this card thing and see that, consciousness seems to be way less fundamental than brains.
I don't agree with that. I'm saying my own consciousness doesn't seem any more fundamental. I'm not making that claim. And I don't think that figures into the argument at all.
Well, so my question would be why do you think there is this other consciousness that is more fundamental in any way than ours? Because to me, it seems like our consciousness epistemologically is the first thing we have access to, and it doesn't seem to be very fundamental.
Right.
I think
that's what I'm
very
saying
contingent.
Too.
So I agree with that part. So that part we say we don't really have much reason to believe consciousness is fundamental because of our consciousness, because our consciousness is not very fundamental.
Right.
So where are you getting this justification to believe that there's this more fundamental consciousness?
Yeah. Okay, good. And that's where I was trying to get to, I think. What I want to say is that we have our conscious experience. Again, I'm claiming that epistemologically we know that best. And what we see is it's this very I was going to say very contingent, but that just sounds so sort of a silly way to put it. But it is a contingent thing that's in flux and changing and in motion and seems to come and seems to go. And so the reality that, and now I think that, unlike the idealist, I think we can infer that there is the sort of physical world that when I am seeing a tree, having the conscious experience of a tree, there really is a physical tree that gives rise to my conscious experience. Again, I'm making the point that I know the conscious experience better than the physical, better than the material. I don't think we ever have direct access to the tree as material. I think we always have it as tree as phenomenal. But I do think we can make a sort of inference to the best explanation that the physical tree is there. But then as we understand what that thing would be, we realize it's a contingent, finite thing. And then as we look around at the world, that's all we have experience of. And so to follow the inference through, there needs to be something that grounds those experiences and the things that we find too. And we can expand this out, though we don't need to get off track.
So I would agree with everything you said there. Consciousness is contingent. We can see things around us. It seems like matter is there. That also seems contingent. And so there must be some more fundamental thing than what we're directly experiencing to ground all of that. So I'd agree with those points.
And ground that in the sense that the word causation can figure in here. I like the word ground because it's broader than that. It's not just merely causing or creating, if you like. I mean, you probably don't like that, but right, it is, bringing into existence and also sustaining into existence. So it's like a fuller, richer term to say that it grounds reality. That's what we need, and that's where I'm saying we don't have a lot of options. And so if I think, because you were pushing back on this before, but it sounded like you were just saying it does need to have a ground. But I'm saying because of its contingency, because of all these features that we find in it, or true of it, that it can't be its own ground. And this is just my move, is to say, okay, so we need something else, and we need something that's non-contingent, that's sort of finitely temporal, that's not in flux, that's not in motion, and so on. And I think you don't have a lot of options here at this point. And again, I would just say, just to sort of, unless you're going to propose other options, I think God best fits this, bill here. He serves as a proper and satisfying ground of being.
Right. So I'd say that there's probably infinitely many options. There's lots of options to pick from. And I would say that's, to limit the number of options, we have to go based off of the evidence we see. And the evidence we see seems to indicate that there are things that could qualify as outside of space-time, like quantum fields. The consensus among physicists is that space and time are emergent from quantum fields. So quantum fields are a entity that is composed of only discovered properties which can qualify as something that can exist outside of space-time and create the universe and space-time and all those things. I don't see any evidence that minds can do those. All the evidence of minds is they're temporal. We have zero evidence of minds existing non-temporally, non-spatially. We have zero evidence of minds that can do anything outside of space and time. It doesn't even seem like it's nomenologically possible for minds to do anything outside of space-time. Quantum fields can, though. They're very good at that. And so given the options we have, it seems quantum fields are a far better option to explain the necessary grounds than a mind. Minds are always in flux. A non-fluxing mind would be a nothing, essentially, as far as we can tell. And so it seems like, given the possibilities we have, quantum field is a far better option to possibly explain the necessary grounds of reality.
Well, it all depends. It depends on what it is we find in our experience. So as we, take a few steps back and say that I think, therefore I am, we have conscious experience, that's what we know best. What do we find there? Again, I think we find these features that I've already mentioned, but I also think we find value, and a variety of values. I think we find moral value. I think we find aesthetic value and those sorts of things. And I'm not sure your quantum field will be able to explain those, but I'd be curious to know if you think that they do. Or maybe deny the existence of those. I don't know.
I'm a moral realist. I believe in objective morality and purpose and those kinds of things too. I don't understand why a quantum field would be any less plausible to explain those things. Because to me, again, that's still, for any given object, the options are either it's fundamental or it's a composite. And if it's a composite, then it being grounded in a mind doesn't in any way explain it. It's just saying it's there and it's a part of the mind. Well, that doesn't tell us if it's fundamental or if it's a composite either way. And to say it's there and it's a part of a quantum field applies no greater or lesser explanatory power there. So to me, it seems like the argument is a like comes from like argument. We see morality instantiated through agents. We don't see morality instantiated through inanimate objects. Therefore, morality must be grounded in a agent, and that is a hasty translation fallacy. It's like hunger. Hunger is only instantiated through agents. Hunger is not instantiated through inanimate objects. Therefore, hunger must be grounded in a supremely hungry guy in the sky. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I imagine there's many different psychological states that you fully grant are completely explained by neurological phenomena, delusions, hallucinations, optical illusions. there's plenty of different psychological phenomena that only are experienced by conscious agents, but are fully explained by misfirings of neurons. And so there's no reason to infer that simply because something is only expressed via agents that it must be grounded in an agent. It doesn't tell us anything one way or the other. So why would you infer that because we have values that they must be grounded in a value being as opposed to a quantum field?
So you're a moral realist, so you think that moral values do exist and they're mind independent.
Yes.
So I'm not, so it's disanalogous to hunger in exactly that respect, is that hunger is, that wouldn't be a good inference the way you put it, but if there are moral facts that truly exist and genuinely exist, then we need to explain the existence of those things. We need to find something that I think the way I'd put it is it just doesn't, I don't see any reason why we would think that the quantum field explains something like moral values, these mind independent, things, whatever they, I guess, let me ask you this. What is a moral fact then? Like if it's a mind independent thing, like where is it? What is it?
Law of physics. What was wrong with the hunger analogy?
Because that would be something that is in us.
Yeah.
That we can give an example, we can give a sort of physical description of what's going on in us that causes hunger, and it doesn't have to be a hungry thing.
I think I got you. So it's like the hunger phenomenon is a subjective neurological phenomenon, and we're talking about like an objective feature of reality. So it's like if you look at the stars, you see a bunch of little dots of light in the sky. Now, that's not a neurological subjective phenomenon in your brain. That's photons that have been created through the laws of physics and gravity and electromagnetism millions of light years away that were then sent to your eyes, and then the weakened electromagnetic force in how the dendrites in your eyes form send the signals to your brain. So even though you're having a sensation that is subjective, like hunger, this sensation isn't grounded in your brain. It's grounded in reality. There's a thing in reality, namely the laws of physics, that generate these things and generate the interactions with your brain. And this is an objective feature. It's not subjective. And so morality,
what's the objective feature?
The laws of physics.
But the experience is subjective.
Yeah, the experience doesn't matter though.
And it could have gone in infinitely different ways. Like you could have had the taste of strawberry shortcake in your mouth when looking up at the night sky. Like those are not like nomological connections, like necessary connections.
Yeah, but they don't need to be. That's not
right. But I'm just saying the experience that we have is different from the whole thing that you just described, right? I mean, it's not an idea.
The point of the analogy,
that's all that it is the photons and the dendrites and everything you just said.
No. So let me continue with my analogy for a bit. So like the laws of physics are objective. This experience of seeing the starry skies is not grounded in your subjective mental states. It's grounded in reality. There's something objectively independent that causes these states. Your sense experience could be wrong, but that doesn't matter. The point is that these are grounded in an objective feature of reality. And morality could be the same. It could be a law of physics. And that law of physics could be like gravity, and it permeates the universe and interacts with us such that we feel moral intuitions. And those could be wrong. There are definitely people who are psychopaths who don't have moral intuitions or have wrong ones, and that's fine. The point is that it could be grounded not in a psychological state like hunger, but it could be grounded in a law of physics like gravity, which permeates the universe and affects our brains to have the sensations of morality.
Mm-hmm. But it's not, I wouldn't say that it's grounded in those things. It's caused by those things. Like you're not describing what the conscious, at least I wouldn't think you're describing what the conscious experience is. You're just giving a correlation to what gives rise to that.
Well, I don't think the conscious experience is morality. I think the conscious experience is an experience of morality, just like we have an experience of something.
No. I meant the conscious experience of looking at the night sky. Wasn't that what you were describing in that analogy?
Well, no. In that analogy, the point is the night sky, the actual stars, the actual photons.
But that doesn't ground our conscious experience that
Right, but I
causes
don't
it,
so,
that
so the
gives
conscious
rise
experience
to it.
doesn't matter here. So the point is that the grounding of the stars is reality. So if morality is a thing that's objective, the grounding of morality can also be reality, whether or not we experience it. We don't need to experience it. And we can experience it and it could be faulty, whether we experience it all doesn't matter, but it can be grounded completely independent of experience as a law of physics, just like gravity is there, independent of experience. And then we experience it through a medium of intuitions or sensations. And so whether or not we experience it just doesn't matter at all. What matters is what can ground morality can be a completely non-conscious thing that can then affect conscious things, just like hunger can be a completely grounded in a completely non-conscious thing that affects conscious things.
Okay. Do you think that, so you're saying that morality is like the moral fact just is a physical fact?
Yes, that's moral naturalism. That is the position.
And and are these facts normative facts?
I don't like normative has multiple different definitions, and whether or not oughtness is actually a property is, I think you don't need oughtness, but you can still have normative qualities to it. It's a more complicated position.
Yeah, what do you mean? Because that sounds like you're denying normativity. If you
Normativity
deny,
has
in other words, if you deny oughtness, you're denying normativity,
no, that's
very basic sense
not
of normativity.
not technically true. So if you go to moral naturalism, there's different interpretations of morality and whether or not you need oughts. I think you don't need oughts because I think oughts are human gibberish. So like, is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral? How would you answer that?
Say the question again. I'm sorry.
Is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral?
Uh, you ought to do it because it's moral.
Bingo. And that's essentially the Euthyphro dilemma. But what it states is that if oughtness or normativity was intrinsic to morality, then you then it's moral because you ought to do it, which it's not the case.
Well,
You ought to do something because it's moral. And so if I was like going to draw a Venn diagram for you, what this would mean is ought you do something because it's moral means that the qualities of morality, if you like draw a bubble around morality and all the different properties of whatever makes it up, oughtness isn't in that bubble. Oughtness is outside of that bubble, and you ought to do something because morality is instantiated, and you define more oughtness as having to do with whatever morality is defined as. Now, if something if you ought to do some, or if it's moral because you ought to do it, that means that there's the bubble of morality, and oughtness is inside of that bubble. It's moral because you ought to do it. So oughtness is inside of morality. It is a intrinsic property required of morality. And so the point of the contrast is the first horn is it's moral because you ought to do it, would show that oughtness is intrinsic of morality, and you ought to do it because it's moral shows oughtness is extrinsic to morality. It's not required in morality at all. And so I think that given most of our intuitions, oughtness isn't required in morality at all. It's kind of irrelevant. It's a human addition.
No, you can't get there from that. That's the leap, I think, is to go from, is to push it. And I don't get, I'm not sure what you mean by the bubble here, but I think I know what you mean by intrinsic or extrinsic, because the move was to make it extrinsic, and then it's therefore not needed or gibberish or however you put it. But I don't think that follows for sure. I mean, I don't know why anybody would concede that. To say that something, we ought to do something because it's moral, doesn't make it extrinsic or unnecessary at
Are you
all.
familiar with the Euthyphro dilemma?
Yeah, familiar.
So in the Euthyphro dilemma, it's something pious because the gods say it, or did the gods say it because it's pious? The point
Right.
being that if the gods say it because it's pious, that means it's pious based off some independent standard, and the gods are just arbitrarily saying it. But if it's pious because the gods say it, then the determining factor is the gods say so, and they make it pious because they said so. And so the point of the dilemma is to establish the primacy of one of the premises. Is it the piety, or is it the gods say so? And so the same thing applies to the analogy I'm using. It's the primacy, which is more important. The core of the morality, or the oughtness. And pretty much everybody I've asked gives the same answer you do. It's not you ought to do something because it's moral. That is the correct answer. I agree. Morality is more important than oughtness. And so I think that oughtness is really irrelevant. It's just
But
something
see
we add
that, but
on.
that's the point. I don't mean to cut you off again here, but
That's fine.
that's the point where you say, therefore, it's just irrelevant. Just because you say you ought to do something because it's moral doesn't therefore make oughtness irrelevant, right? Because there could be entailment here. It could be the case that because there is a moral fact that entails that you ought to do X. And
Well, that would
so
be the first horn. So it's
no,
kind of like in the Euthyphro, you couldn't say the
no,
same
it's
thing. You couldn't say,
downstream from morality. So ontologically, it's the moral fact is the case, and that entails, so downstream, what's more primary, to use your word, is the moral fact, but that entails that you ought to do. So X is morally right. That entails that you ought to do X. Now there's entailment. You can't just say, therefore it's irrelevant. Therefore we just lop off oughtness. I mean, you can, but that just doesn't follow with what I've conceded and what you, if you put this to others, they've conceded, because it could be an entailment relation there, and these go hand in hand. So that wherever you have a moral fact, you have oughtness, and in fact, I would say that's the standard view of morality, is that you're not talking about morality unless it entails how we ought to live, unless it entails normativity.
well, I mean, you could say the same thing about the Euthyphro dilemma. Wherever you have the gods say
It's
so,
not
it
the use
must
of
be
dilemma.
pious. Well, no.
Yeah.
The point of the entailments between the two premises would be the same. So if you say there is an entailment between the gods saying so and it making something pious, like, okay, that's just granting the second
Right, but then
horn.
that's
Or if you say
arbitrary.
the arbitrariness is not the point I'm trying to get for. It's the entailment
Right, but
criterion.
that's the consequence of that horn that people
Right.
find troubling. It's not that then you'd have to do what the gods say. It's that you'd have to do what the gods say, and that thing would be arbitrary.
Right, but that part is irrelevant to what's important to me, or what the part I'm
I get
extracting.
that. I get that. Yeah.
So the point here is that either way, you can say that there is an entailment of piety relationship to what the gods say, or what
Right.
gods say to the piety relationship. And the one that's more important, I think, is the only one you need to keep. You don't need to keep the other one is irrelevant.
It's not more important.
It's superfluous. It's literally just a
It's not.
consequence of the other
Yeah.
one. So
No,
it's
I
like a
don't think
relabeling.
anybody. I can't imagine
Well, so
anybody
let me
who
walk you through this. So if
like
the
a moral
gods,
realist. I can't imagine a moral realist saying, moral facts. Now, what you might have, like there are people that say, make a distinction between moral values and moral obligations, because we're not always obligated to do, certain things that are morally right to do. So I'm not obligated to go serve at my, local homeless shelter, let's say. But it would be morally good or morally praiseworthy or even morally right if I did, right? So there's a distinction there, but to lop off and say it's superfluous to have moral normativity or any oughtness whatsoever, I don't think we're talking about morality anymore at that point.
well, so as I mentioned earlier in moral naturalism on the page for Stanford Encyclopedia, there are examples that literally say oughtness is irrelevant, but that would be a debate you could have with the other academics on the topic. But the important thing is here, the consequence of the Euthyphro dilemma, piety is irrelevant now, because if it's just what the gods say, you don't need the word piety. It just tells you nothing other than what the gods say. So this word piety loses all value because it's not describing anything more than just what the gods say. So if oughtness is the same and it's an entailment of morality, the oughtness loses all independent value. It's nothing now. It's just describing the morality. And so that would be why it's unnecessary. And it seems like oughtness as a concept is pretty irrelevant and unnecessary
What?
for morality at all.
Well, why is that?
Why would you need it? So if there's a moral fact, like it is immoral to drown a baby or something,
Yeah.
whether or not you ought to do it is irrelevant.
What? Tell me more. Explain that, because I it feels like you're saying,
Well, so like
it's
if I said,
it's a moral fact that I should not do this terrible and horrendous thing to this baby, but whether or not you ought to do it, I'm kind of either way.
no, so like if morality is that which corresponds to God's nature or something, Just to pick an example, or it could be a platonic
Okay.
object, abstract object, law of
Sure.
physics, doesn't make a difference.
Sure.
Whatever corresponds to this object.
Sure.
If something doesn't correspond to that object, it is immoral. Now, whether or not you want to do it or ought to do it makes no difference, because
Why
whether or
though?
not, wait. So whether or not you have some oughtness makes no factual correspondence difference to whether or not this fact corresponds to the nature of God. If it corresponds to the nature of God, that makes it moral.
Right.
Now you add on this whether or not you ought to do it. But whether or not you ought to do it makes no difference to whether or not it corresponds to God.
Right.
If it
True.
right.
That's
So if
true.
it corresponds to God, it's moral. And this
Okay.
oughtness thing, like it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's gone. It makes no difference. You don't even need to consider it.
No.
The only thing that matters to morality is, does it correspond to the nature of morality?
But there's the slippage there. Like you just changed it. You went from it doesn't matter for its corresponding to the nature of God.
Yeah.
To it doesn't matter at all.
So like truth is like a moral fact is true if it corresponds to the nature of God, right?
Yeah. And now we want to have a moral discussion and figure out how we ought to live.
But that's irrelevant to the truth of morality.
It's irrelevant. It may be in a strict sense irrelevant to the truth or the correspondence to it's being a moral fact. But now we want to have this whole dimension we call morality and figure out how we ought to live. And if you're saying that's irrelevant, it sounds like you're saying it's irrelevant whether or not you kill the baby or drown the baby or not. And I'm guessing you're not meaning that, but that's what it seems to me to be saying. If you say oughtness doesn't matter, though, it's just because it's what's stopping me from just saying, yeah, that's a moral fact, but I don't care about it. I'm not going to live my life by it. It's not like it makes it such that I ought to live that way. That sounds like what you're saying, but and again, I'm not saying that you would do that, obviously. I'm just saying because I think you know that you ought not to do that.
Well, it sounds like you just admitted that the oughtness has nothing to do with the truth of morality. Morality can be true completely independent of the oughtness. Oughtness makes no difference to the truth whatsoever. The truth of morality.
Or the correspondence.
The truth, yes, that's all I'm talking about. So the
but
truth
listen, it's not
morality has nothing to do with oughtness. Oughtness is gone from the truth statements of morality. It's not even in there. It's completely irrelevant.
Again, I'm not probably conceding all that, but just for the sake of the argument, I can say that whether or not something corresponds to the nature of God, I'm not having the discussion about oughtness at this point. But now that I realize, okay, this moral fact is a fact, now oughtness comes in full force because reality is not just about truth, right? On a full-fledged view, philosophical view, it would be truth, beauty, and goodness. And we need to figure out how we ought to live. Like, in other words, it does me no good to teach my son, let's say, here's what the moral fact is. I need to now move on from that to say, now I want to teach you how you ought to live. And that's where oughtness figures in deeply. Like, to say that it's gibberish. Like, so if somebody, what would you say to somebody, again, not you or not, right, I'm not trying to do a cheap shot here at all. If somebody is considering, is that a back scratcher?
Yeah, a back scratcher.
Nice, man. The overstuffed chair and a back scratcher. I don't know why you ever need to get up. Honestly.
I don't. I'm like glued to the chair. It's just absorbed into me.
So what would you say to somebody who's considering doing something horrendous, like just awful, and you say, hey, look, man, like this is the moral fact. This is the moral fact. Right? I almost said you shouldn't do it, but that's oughtness. What would you say to them if they say, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm going to do it? I don't care about that moral fact.
Well, that's the part that I think is gibberish. Like, what difference does that make? Like, whether or not I'm able to convince them or whether or not a fact would convince them makes no difference.
I'm not talking about convincing them. I'm just saying, what would you say? Would you just say, okay, yeah, there's no such thing as oughtness. That's gibberish.
Well, I'd say they're factually going to do an immoral action.
Unless you were to tell them you ought not to do that.
Well, that's going to make zero difference one way or the other. Like,
how do we know? What if they say, I realize that, I consider it to be, on your view, these come apart. Like on my view, they don't, because it entails, like if something is a moral fact, that it entails you ought not to do it.
Well, we know
Right. So
psychologically that's
but for
false. We know
your view,
psychologically there's no connection between
okay,
the two.
let me
But
finish
that's
here. Let
oh,
me finish.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I've cut you off too. So, that's what I did. Okay, so on your view, these come apart. You have moral facts and oughtness is irrelevant as gibberish, right? But on my view, I would say here's the step is to say, look, this is a true moral fact. And now that we've established with some person that's considering doing so, it doesn't even have to be horrendous, just something like lying on cheating on an exam, let's say, which is bad, but not, there's worse. And I convinced them to say that's wrong. And then the conclusion of which for me would be to say, so therefore you ought not to do that. But you're saying that's just gibberish. What happens when somebody says, so for me, if somebody says, I don't care that that's a moral fact, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say, well, look, if you concede it's a moral fact, then you realize that you ought not to do it. And maybe they would change their mind if they see that connection. I don't know. I'm just right. But for you, you're literally conceding that there's no oughtness that attaches to something's being a moral fact. It would seem to me you would just have to say, to be consistent with your view, like, hey, you be you. If you want to concede that it's a moral fact, then you can do whatever you want because there's no oughtness that attaches to moral facts.
Well, so this is why I think
that
it's
makes
gibberish.
Sense?
No, but so like
really?
What comes to mind is that if I'm trying to, I want a model of objective morality. What is the minimum criteria I need for a model of objective morality? Oughts are not a part of that. I can say to have objective morality, I need an instantiation, God's nature, Platonic objects, a priori abstract, something to instantiate the moral facts.
But what
and
is correspondence?
Correspondence to that. That's what the moral fact is, the correspondence to the instantiator of the moral fact. Okay. Now I have objective morality. I need to make no statements about oughts whatsoever. I have objective morality. Oughts are not required in this. And then
don't see why. I just don't see why. Why are oughtness not part of that?
If it corresponds to God's nature, that's what makes it moral, right? You don't no mention of oughts.
That makes the moral fact, but it doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us how to live morally.
I don't need any of that.
Why?
The only part I'm asking is the moral fact. Do I have the moral fact if it corresponds to God's nature? That's all I need.
No, I think if you say, and by the way, this moral fact has nothing to do with oughtness, then I don't think you really genuinely have a moral fact. Because I think by their very nature, they entail oughtness and normativity.
Well, that's the same that seems obviously false. Because like even earlier, you admitted that, yeah, if it corresponds to God's nature, you have a moral fact. You have a moral fact. Like, meh.
And now you have a moral that entails oughtness.
Well, again, that's the part.
You need like saying in the world if you're to have
that seems
morality.
To be like an arbitrary assertion you've made based off of nothing. So it's like if I said I have a moral fact and it entails a potato. Like what? Why? What? Why? Why do you need that? And then this is where you give the argument.
No, you couldn't possibly think that. You don't think that, do you? Do you think that's literally the logically equivalent scenario?
Yes.
That
because
when I tell my student who's I catch him writing his answers on the bottom of his shoe or something, about to go into the exam, and I say, it's wrong. I think already that's a normative term, but if I say it's a moral fact that you see, I almost can't even say it without using the word ought or should or right or wrong. These are all normative facts. So if I say, look, it corresponds to reality that
that is immoral.
That is immoral. But I feel like that's even a normative term. But so and he says, I agree. And I say, so therefore you ought not to do it. But on your view, you would have to say, but that's irrelevant to what you do here in this test. It's just letting you know that that's a moral fact, that cheating on the exam does not correspond to the nature of God or to some physical law or something like that. But you say, but you be you do what you want. That has no oughtness, no normativity. That doesn't impinge on what you do at all.
Well, it doesn't. We know it doesn't. We know that.
Okay, so
psychological.
That's fine.
Wait. So we know psychological tests say that people know something is moral, it does not in any way affect their motivation to do or not do
No,
it.
no,
There's
I'm
lots
not
of
talking about
psychology.
motivation.
One sec. So there is nothing that oughtness does psychologically, one way or the other. But more
That's false.
importantly, if we take the factual true statement, if someone goes to a test and writes 1 + 1 = 3, and I say that's objectively wrong, I'm not going to follow, and they say, well, I don't care. I'm not going to follow up. Oh, but you ought to. I don't care. That's
Right.
irrelevant.
Me either.
Oughtness is irrelevant. Like, they're wrong. They do not correspond to reality. Full stop. That's all you need. Adding this, well, you ought to
No.
do 1 + 1 = 2 is just silly potato speech. It's gibberish. And the
What?
same thing applies to morality.
Okay.
If someone does an immoral action, I can say you have objectively done an immoral action. Full stop. I don't need to say you ought to have done otherwise. That's irrelevant. It's gibberish. I can say you have done an immoral action or you have done a moral action. Whether you ought or ought not makes no difference whatsoever. The morality is in the action and the consequence itself. And the oughts are just gibberish, like saying, like, who cares?
Okay. Do you think someone ought to not drown babies for fun?
No, I think it would be immoral to drown babies for fun.
What does that mean?
It means that it doesn't correspond to the nature of morality.
So you would be happy to say that if somebody said, should I, because should and ought is the same kind of normative term.
Yep.
Should I drown a baby? You would say, look,
I'd say it's a hypothetical imperative.
That's gibberish. That question is gibberish. And it's a moral fact that you, again, you can't even say it. It's a moral fact.
I'll just answer. I would say it is immoral to drown babies for fun. If you do it, you will be immoral.
I know,
it
but
does not correspond to the should is a hypothetical imperative. There is no should in the universe.
It's not a hypothetical imperative.
Again, you're asking for my view here. So my view, it's a hypothetical imperative. There is no categorical oughts or categorical shoulds. They're irrelevant. I can tell you for a fact this is immoral. And if you want to be immoral, then you should drown babies. If you want to be moral, you should not drown babies. But the shoulds there make no difference to the truth statement. It is immoral to drown babies.
Yeah.
So if I ask,
troubling to me,
it's basic philosophy. It's not like
no. That's not most people. By wide margin, think that normativity and morality are necessarily connected, even if you concede that the because goes from moral fact to normativity, because one is moral ontology. We're deciding what is a moral fact, and the other is ethics, is your ethical theorizing, let's say, is where we figure out how we ought to live. And by lopping them off, all you have is moral ontology and you have no ethical theory.
Yeah, because none of the ethical theory can affect the truth values. It's literally irrelevant. Literally nothing you ever do in the application side, the epistemology methodology side, will ever have any effect on the truth value or the ontology. So if you're talking about objective morality, all of that application stuff is completely irrelevant. It's confusing epistemology and ontology.
Like, no, not irrelevant. That's too strong. It's not irrelevant. I feel like what you're this move that you've made a few times now is to say this piece is downstream from this piece, therefore this is completely irrelevant and gibberish and so on. And what I'm trying to say is not irrelevant. I mean, good gracious, but you're right about this, that the theory doesn't change the truth value of the statement of moral ontology. Full stop. That's got to be all packed in together. It doesn't change the truth value of the statement of moral ontology. What it does change is the truth value of the statement of theory, of especially applied ethics. So now I'm going to say, should I do X? That your view absolutely changed the truth value of that statement, which is a very different statement from whether or not something is a moral fact.
Wait, epistemology doesn't have epistemology.
I'm not talking about epistemology at all.
No.
Nothing I said there was epistemology.
Of the applied parts, I'm using the applied part epistemology methodology to refer to the applied part.
No, not applied. That would not be, because you might not know whether or not I do this or that, and you ought to do one or the other. You know what I mean? Like, you might not know if I do X or Y, but it's definitely the case that you ought to do X. You just don't know. I mean, that's just it's not epistemology. I'm not talking about epistemology. I'm saying the truth value of the statement of, let's just say, applied ethics. You know, the subject S should perform the action A. You're saying should or ought, these terms are irrelevant. That has no, for you, that has no truth value.
Well,
You're saying as long as we get the moral ontology, the sort of meta ethics figured out, and then because the applied ethics doesn't change the truth value of that, therefore they're irrelevant. And I'm saying that just seems deeply troubling, because I think there is a truth value of whether or not you should or whether or not you ought to do, drown babies or tell the truth or, cheat on exams and things like that. There's a truth value to that normative statement. And I think you're committed to saying that there's not a truth value of that normative statement.
Yeah,
and you're saying it's irrelevant, but it's not irrelevant because I need to know what I'm going to do on the exam today. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, truth is that which corresponds to reality, and you ought to corresponds to nothing. There are no correspondences to ought statements or should statements. It can't correspond to anything.
Most
what is it?
Ethicists disagree.
Yeah,
even naturalists will try to find something that grounds the oughtness. They might say it's basic, or they might say it corresponds to like some sort of a basic experience of human experience and so on, but they definitely have normativity.
Right. That's why I think the models that don't are better models. Like, there's what does it correspond to?
Right, but then you just have to bite the bullet. Then I think, and just admit that you can't say to the person who's about to do something horrendous that you should not do it, that you ought not to do it, because you don't have applied ethics on your view.
Right. No, I grant that, because that's not biting a bullet. It's actually a better logical position. Like, what does you should not do that correspond to? If that's a true statement, if that's a true statement that you should not do something, what does it correspond to?
It is an entailment of
what does it correspond to? I don't care about the entailment. What does it correspond to? Truth is that which corresponds to reality.
I would say it corresponds to the nature of God as well.
How does you ought to do something correspond to the nature of anything?
I think I don't see any problem with saying that it is an entailment of the moral fact itself, that it is like when you made the intrinsic extrinsic move. I would deny that and say that part of what it is to be a moral fact is that it has normative consequences of how we ought to live. And that moral fact itself corresponds, on my view, as a theist, that corresponds to the nature of God in some deep sense.
Well, I'm sure that's what sounds like it makes sense to you, but to me that sounds like gibberish. If I ask you, like, what does it correspond to? You can't say.
You might think it's wrong, but it's not gibberish. You might think it's wrong, but it's not gibberish.
I don't think it's wrong.
This is coherent.
No, I think it's
a coherent statement. How is it incoherent?
If you say the statement "you should do X" corresponds to an entailment of the fact that it corresponds to God, that does not make sense.
I didn't say that.
I thought so. Just to go through it again. So you said the statement "you should not do X" is an entailment of a correspondence fact to the nature of God.
I didn't say it just like that, but let's go with that. So what's incoherent about that?
How does the statement "you should do X"? What does that correspond to? Because you didn't answer that. You said it's an entailment of some other correspondence fact, but the statement "you should do X" does not correspond to anything, as far as I can tell. You just said, well, it's an entailment of some other correspondence.
I think it corresponds. So now we're talking. I mean, remember, we're talking about a moral statement. We're talking about a normative statement. So it's not going to be the same kind of correspondence that, say, the statement "there is a tree," that just sort of neatly corresponds to the fact that there's a tree out there outside of my window. Normative facts are admittedly more difficult to describe how they correspond, but I'm happy to say that this normative statement corresponds to the nature of God. God's nature makes it such that we ought to do X, Y, and Z, whatever the case may be. And that is not incoherent. You might not agree, but it's not incoherent.
Well, so you saying that these kinds of normative statements are a new kind of thing that is in no way analogous to like there is a tree.
I didn't say that. I didn't say no way analogous. I didn't say new kind of fact. I just said this is a perfectly coherent. I said it's more difficult to sort of work out, kind of in an online discussion. But I spend a couple weeks on this in my ethics class of talking about these facts, these normative facts, and how it's more difficult. Again, I grant that, but that's why ethics is so really interesting, and that we ultimately do need something to ground the normativity of it. And I think that's grounded in the character of God.
I think I would agree with the arguments from the non-cognitivists and I forget the other ones, but they say that you can't do that, and they have very good reasons why you can't do that, and those make a lot of sense.
But you're not a non-cognitivist,
right?
You're
because I think you don't need that. You don't need the normativity. You can get rid of that and still have everything about it. And it seems very coherent the way I'm explaining it. Like it seems like
I'm not saying it's incoherent. I'm saying it's deeply troubling that we couldn't tell someone who is contemplating a horrendous act that they ought not to do it.
Why?
That seems to be a very important part of our human experience and our human lives. That's what I do with my kids. That's what I do with my students. I try to teach them what are the normative facts of life, in a way, and that they ought to live by them.
Well, for me, it's like if I'm comparing,
and those are all gibberish to you.
Well, if I'm comparing two models of morality, one has the ability to tell other humans they should not do something, and one doesn't. Like that part seems kind of irrelevant. Like whether or not, like if we think of any truth theory of knowledge of physics, the ability to tell other people they should do something is not relevant to truth in any other context.
The ability, I mean, that's easy to say, right? It's easy to say, but if we have, I mean, man, my goodness, like to think of all the people that have given their lives to a moral cause because they think that they ought to do that, like that's some sort of should in their life, this sort of moral imperative in their life that they ought to do this thing. I mean, and you're saying that's just gibberish.
No, it's still moral. What they did was moral, but the ought belief was a hypothetical imperative they implied on it.
It's not hypothetical. I don't see the hypothetical bit.
Well, if I want to be moral, I should do moral things, hypothetical imperative. So you can still have the ought, but it's hypothetical, not categorical. So,
but I'm not claiming it as a hypothetical.
No, I am. So in my position, all of those people you mentioned who did things under the presupposition there was some ought statement, did moral things, but the ought statement that they used to justify their actions was something they hypothetically applied from their own psychology, not like a thing that's intrinsic to morality in the universe.
No,
it seems to work just fine.
But that's now it doesn't sound like you are a moral realist. That if you're a moral realist, it wouldn't be just something in their own psychology.
The oughts are not. The morality is, again, the facts that correspond to the nature of morality. That's objective, independent of psychology. But the oughts are hypothetical. Difference hypothetical versus categorical imperatives. Hypothetical are the psychology things subjectively people apply to what they want. Categorical is the objective.
Not necessarily. I mean, that's not. It doesn't have to make them psychological to be hypothetical.
Yeah, it's just an example. Okay. But it's like the categorical imperative would be like the objective kind that you're talking about, whereas hypothetical would be more like the subjective kind that isn't really like a feature of reality.
Right. But like Kant's categorical imperative is a normative statement.
Right. That would be the objective kind. The categorical is the objective kind.
Right. But you think that's gibberish.
Right. Hypothetical are the ones that I think are correct. So I think there are no categoricals. There are hypotheticals.
Yeah, that's deeply troubling.
Doesn't make sense. But I think we've gone down like the rabbit hole of my particular morality.
Yeah.
Wanted to go back to why would, even if we granted that there was normativity, why would you need a God for this? Why would a mind be a better explanation than a law of physics?
I think that just, in my view, I mean, I guess putting it, I was going to say that best explains it, but that's not going to do a lot for you, I'm guessing. But
Wait, well, why
maybe
does it best explain it?
yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying. I think the way I'd put it is maybe that would resonate with you is that, right, physical laws as we experience them don't have normativity. So the law of gravity, for example, does not have normativity. It's a descriptive claim that can be well worked out and expressed, but it doesn't have normativity. And I'm not sure that normativity, as I reflect upon it, makes any sense unless there's a mind that stands behind it. When I think that I ought to follow the rules of, say, my institution, or follow the rules of the state laws, let's say, or federal laws and so on, those have minds behind them. They're not, it's not like the physical laws, right? And so because those have normativity and they have minds standing behind them, that gives me plausible analogy to saying that there's a divine mind that stands behind the moral laws.
So are you saying that legal laws have the same kind of normativity?
No. I'm just saying that they do have normativity. So by analogy, we can extend that to, and those are the creations of a human mind. Therefore, we can sort of, by analogy, move to, I mean, again, I'm just saying, like, when I reflect on it, normativity seems to make most sense as a property of a mind, involving a mind, I guess I should say. But I don't think you're going to like that statement, or it's not going to be very persuasive. And so to kind of use the way you've argued a few times, where we look around at the world and we sort of see analogies and make conclusions, the difference of a legal law and a, say, law of gravity or a physical law, is there's no normativity with the physical law. It doesn't, right? That's definitely, when
Right.
you conclude, you ought to fall at a certain rate when you jump off a building or something, like that doesn't make any sense. But when you say you ought to go the speed limit, it does make sense. And that normativity seems to be generated by lawmakers. And
Well, so I would,
by analogy, we can, I think it's best, the moral laws, so to speak, are best explained by a divine mind.
well, I would partially agree there. I think that I would agree that the normativity we experience from legal laws would be an applicable analogy, but it seems like those are all subjective. And so if we wanted to say there was an objective morality, we couldn't say it came from a mind, because all of the mind-based normativity we have examples of are purely subjective. And so if we wanted an objective basis of morality, we'd have to say it's not normative, or in the normativity that we see as a result of human minds, and it would be more plausibly a law of physics, because those are more plausibly objective. And so if we want to keep the objectivity of morality, it's more plausible a law of physics. And if you wanted to make an analogy to normativity, it would be more plausible to say that morality was purely subjective.
No, I don't think so at all. I think that what the speed limit is on my interstate a few miles from here, it's just, indexed to time t, just call that now, is an objective fact. There's no subjectivity about that. There's no subject in view, in fact. It is just what the law is at this moment. It's an objective fact that it is 70 miles per hour to drive at, December 19th, 10:32 in the morning, Central Standard Time, on Interstate 20.
Well, the way I understand subjective is like mind dependent. So is that the case?
No,
if
it's
there
not
were
mind
no
dependent.
minds? It's not.
No, that's
speed
not
limit?
mind dependent. That's not what we mean by mind dependent. Mind dependent would be to say, like, it's existing at a particular moment, if you want to put it that way. Like my pain, like if I were to smash my finger right now in my drawer or something, it's a little extreme, but right? That pain would be subjective in a strict sense because it's dependent on my mind. And the moment, right, if my mind were to pass out of existence, then that pain would pass out of existence. That's mind dependent in a really robust sense. But the speed limits being what it is does not depend on any particular mind, right,
Right.
at time t.
They depend on a collective mind, a set of minds who all share the same mental idea. Because I
No,
don't think,
I don't
like,
think so.
when I think of objective, I think of something that's true. If all minds ceased to exist or didn't exist, it would still be true. That's
And at
mind
time t,
independent.
that would be true. Because at time t, there were minds existing, and
As
it
if there
would
were no
still be
minds,
an
no
objective
minds, no minds. So if there are no minds,
time t plus one or something that where no minds exist.
if no minds ever existed, if they all ceased to exist, then after that point, or if they didn't exist at that point, would it still be true? So when I think of the speed limit, that seems very mind dependent, very subjective, socially subjective. It's
It's
like the epitome of subjectivity, and
no,
where it's
it's not
something
the
that's the
epitome.
opposite of subjectivity would be laws
No,
of
to me,
physics.
the epitome would be where one, like for morality, or for the speed limit to be subjective in the sense that I think you have in mind. And again, especially when you say the epitome of subjectivity, would be for me to be able to just choose my speed limit when I get on the interstate. It's just whatever I want to do at that particular moment. That's the speed limit for me. But what the speed limit is has objectivity to me. Now, there are other minds in the mix, and you're right that it is dependent socially in some ways, but that doesn't make it, therefore, a non-objective fact what the speed limit is at this particular moment. Does that make sense? So, like, I just don't think it has the subjectivity in the bad sense that you seem to be saying that it does, to break the analogy between God. Now, if you're just saying that there's a way in which this analogy breaks down, well, that's right. All analogies break down. That's why they're analogies, not literal identities. So there are ways in which the traffic laws in the state of Texas are not like the moral laws. That's true enough, but it's not a mere subjectivity, especially not the epitome of subjectivity. In fact, for me, they are objective reality, and I can get on the interstate. I won't do this for the sake of your audience, but right, I could get on the interstate and show you that I will get a ticket if I do it long enough and fast enough.
That would be great. I get a lot of views. Please do that. Phenomenal. But so, like, when I'm thinking of your analogy was that if we look at laws written by legal institutions, they have normativity. And when we look at our intuitions of morality, they have normativity. Therefore, the laws of our intuitions must be governed by some kind of similar agent-based normativity. And I'm looking at our moral feelings, and I'm thinking these seem objective. And
Feelings
by
are.
objective, I mean true independent of any opinion ever. Like, if there was no mind, it would still be the case, kind of a thing. That's what
Yeah, but
I
that's
intuitively feel.
trivially the case. I mean, now you're just ruling minds out of the picture. I mean, the whole argument is to say that there's a mind that stands behind normativity. And so if you're then taking minds completely out of the picture, well, trivially that follows. You know what I'm saying? But I'm saying there has to be mind in the picture somewhere in order to make the argument even get off the ground. I'm saying that a mind stands behind normativity. I think normativity makes best sense when grounded in a mind. At again, sort of like, dialing it back to, so that legal laws are the product of human minds. That gives us a sense of normativity, that we ought to follow this. It is an objective fact. That gives us an analogy to say that the moral laws also come from a divine mind. So, or
Well,
at
so
least
I would,
something that makes sense of them, their being normative, their being binding on us.
well, we can just grant God exists for the sake of the argument here. The point is that if we look at morality, I think morality is true, independent of any opinion, including God's. I think it makes more sense that
Yep.
morality has this feature to it that it's unchanging, it's
Yep.
not contingent on opinion. Therefore, it could be grounded in God's nature, and his opinions have no effect on it whatsoever. His conscience has no effect on it whatsoever. He's determined by his nature such that he can't change the moral facts. They are a feature of reality that are independent of his mind. Still, God exists. Still, he's the grounds of objective morality. And that would seem to make more sense of the fact that there is this objective, mind independently objective fact of morality. And I think that feature of morality is one of the things that we have to account for when we're looking for what could a potential basis of morality be. It should have this feature that it's not mind contingent, because if it is, then it seems to make it subjective, which then it loses one of the important qualities of being morality, which is the same argument you're making about me giving up oughtness. I think that because that is an important feature, that the unchangingness, the objective, independent of opinion feature of morality is a key feature of what we intuitively feel is moral. The thing that best corresponds to what could potentially provide that feature would be a non-conscious thing, God's nature or a law of physics or something. And if you are making an argument that the normativity aspect is best explained by a mind feature, those two seem to be in conflict. And I would say that the more important one is the nature one, and that this, if you're making a comparison to human laws, which are determined by minds, and the determined by minds factor gives them the normativity, it seems like subjectivity is baked into that view of morality.
Yeah, I don't think so. uh, yeah, but I think there's just different notions of subjectivity at work here.
Sure.
And I don't think that, because there's a sort of quite literal sense of subjectivity, which is just relative to a subject that may not be subjectivity in the bad sense at all. And so I think at the end of the day, what I'd be committed to say is that whatever subjectivity attaches in some sense or other to the laws of the land, speed limit laws and so on, is not a bad sense of subjectivity. And maybe it is parallel in a way to God, the subjectivity of morality as it relates to God, but it's not. There's still a perfectly good sense, and in fact, the sense that I think we typically talk about, that the moral laws are objective, even if there's some sense in which they're subjective. I don't think that that's like if they're relative to the subject of God, like that's not the bad sense of subjectivity. For me, whether or not I should drown the baby or whether or not I should cheat on the exam, it's still an objective fact of reality that I should not. And similarly, again, analogously, whether or not I should go, 120 on the interstate on the ride home tonight, that's an objective feature of the world that I should not.
Well, I think the bad aspect of subjectivity is it's contingent on opinion, like the examples atheists always uses. Well, what if God said drowning babies is moral? Would it be moral, kind of a thing? And if it was moral, if God decided that, then that would make it subjective, and that would make it the arbitrary thing.
Right. That's not my
We don't
view.
want that.
Right.
And so the kind of good objectivity that we want is the kind where this is completely independent of any opinion God could ever have. His opinions cannot affect it. It is completely separate from his opinions. He can't change it. It doesn't matter what he wants. He can't change it, kind of a thing, which would seem to be fit more of the definition of mind independent, like it was grounded in his nature, independent of his choices altogether. And that seems like to fit that kind of objective definition. Laws of physics work really well. God's nature works really well. Anything related to consciousness seems to work really badly.
Except that you don't get normativity from the laws of physics.
Yes.
Right. Which is, I think, just where we part company. But that's where I think I would, I'm sure you've thought lots about this and come to this view as a result. But just for your audience sake, I guess, in a way, just to say like that to me is a really big cost. I would be, I would be very hesitant to ever bite that bullet for the whole reason of moral education and what I want people to, as they reflect upon moral values and facts, like what I want them to do with it. And again, it's not just what I want, it's the sort of society that we want. And I kind of just don't think, for most of us, when we were asked the question, how ought we to live, like we would just say, hey, you're just talking gibberish. I find that to be really troubling and just really implausible that we wouldn't have some views about that. And again, but it's, that's fine. I just think that's probably where we part company This is us parting company, by the way. Right, that's where we part company, and that we, you think, and so, but I think we're agreed to say you don't get normativity out of naturalism, or out of at least that version of naturalism.
Right.
And to me, that's a huge cost. And so if anybody does think you have normativity, and maybe tell me what you think about this, if you do have normativity, do you think then something like a divine mind makes good sense of the normativity?
Well, I'd still go with the moral naturalism version, one of the ones that do have normativity, or one of the versions of God that doesn't entail his mind at all. It's just his nature kind of a thing, and his mind is irrelevant. So I would not, I think that any version that wants to keep the objectivity of morality can't have it be contingent on opinion in any sense. And so,
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
well, I'd say that God's consciousness can play no role in morality whatsoever.
And I think there's probably, and I probably wasn't careful enough when I described the view. I do think it's dependent on the nature of God. I was using mind in the broadest of senses to mean, soul, or the divine being, or something to that effect. So that it's not God's opinions that generate the normativity. It's the divine character, really, is how I'd want to put it. That the divine character sort of sets that standard of moral facts. Like that's what we're after, obviously, with the normativity. We're after the norm, or the standard, and God's character sets that standard such that we thereby have normative claims that are binding to us as rational human agents.
Gotcha. We do have some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Tim
Okay.
West's question: objectively, whose haircut is more moral, TJump's or Travis's? Is the
Ooh.
height of TJump's hair more moral, or the neatness of Travis's hair more moral?
That's a question for me to answer?
It's for both of us, I imagine.
Okay, well, what do you think?
I think he who has the best chair is the most moral, and I therefore win.
There you go. I'm good with that one. As
Right.
long as a back scratcher is within reach.
Next question was, from Good Question, can God change his mind?
I think that the answer to that, in a really substantial sense, is no. Especially if what we mean by that is that God can be sort of unsure of, right? I think his divine omniscience entails that he knows, all the available options, and sort of knows by virtue of his character, which is the, I hesitate to say, but, I think I have to say it's something like the best course of action, and knows that from all eternity, or something to that effect. And so there's really no sense in which he's changing his mind, and especially no sense if that means that he's unsure or doesn't know various facts, before they happen, on my view. But there's plenty of people that would say, yeah, plenty of Christians. I don't think I think that's a debate for, sort of amongst Christians, of just where they come out, and it's especially entailed by, I think, what view they, kind of how strong of a view of God they have, if God is divinely omniscient, or if God, and then it also a sort of open theist that would say, like, God knows everything there is to know, but doesn't know what the free agent will do in the future, and so in some sense changes his mind depending on what the decisions of the free creatures do, and so on. So there's plenty of views there. My own view would be to say no, not really.
Gotcha. Winston's mom asks, do you find Islam to be a moral religion, and do you believe Christianity is more moral than other religions?
That's not contentious at all. Do I find it? I think there are versions of it, but I think there would be no doubt that there are immoral versions of Islam, just as I would be quick to add that there's no doubt that there are immoral versions of Christianity too. I mean, so it kind of depends what we mean by this. Now, and again, I'll let the Muslim, defend their religion. I'm troubled by, some of the things that I see in the Quran, like kill the infidel wherever you find them and those types of things. But plenty of people are troubled by various passages in the Old Testament and other places. But that's where I think the Muslim needs to say, like, what does that mean in context, and defend it. And I think if it just means, the more sort of extreme fundamentalist versions, then I am morally troubled. I think that's morally wrong. But same way I would go with the Christian who would look at the Old Testament and find certain passages, and those would be their life verses or something like that. Killing non-combatant, people who are not God's people, or something to that effect. But I would want to have the opportunity to defend various passages in the Old Testament as well. So yeah, I think there's version. I mean, Christianity really predicts this, is that we're really good at getting things wrong, and we do a lot of really horrendous things, and so as fallen creatures, and so I think we can take any good thing and make a mess of it.
Gotcha. Native Atheist, thank you for the super chat. Question for Travis: did your God draw babies, and is that immoral?
Yes. I mean, yes and no. God did cause the flood.
Just clip that first part and just
yeah, that's right. Out. That's right. Please don't. I don't think so this is a really good question, and one for probably another day, because I'll just say this, that my biggest struggle. So again, not to plug my own book, but in the book, in talking about doubts and things like that, this is the one I probably struggle with the most, is some passages that seem so extreme, and where I come out on it. And again, it's going to be way too quick to do it justice, but is that that God is not immoral, but God is also doesn't have the same kinds of obligations that humans do. And so that God, and this is really consistent throughout Scripture, is that God is, he's certainly love and so on, that the Bible is pretty clear about that, but he's also the judge of humanity, and that God can judge humanity. And so that's I would see these Old Testament passages of violence and bloodshed, and I think we just have to be honest of what's there. And again, this is probably going to cause the stream here to blow up a little bit, but because it's way too quick. But right, I read these as judgment passages, and judgment is harsh, and judgment is not fun. But these are that's where I would come out on it.
Gotcha. Thank you for the super chat, CL.
You're not going to respond at all. Okay.
Well, these are the questions, so
yeah.
Like if you do a back and forth in the questions, I wouldn't have to like move on to the other ones. And since they pay me, I'm kind of like obligated to like.
I gotcha.
Hey Tom, you said it's probably consensus that an infinite regress is possible. Would love to hear where you get that from. That would be from the Foundational Attitudes of Quantum Mechanics from Schlosshauser. That is from the paper that shows that infinite regress is the consensus in physics. Next question is from Zap Branigan. How does he justify the obviously immoral actions by Yahweh in the Bible, and Yahweh is the grounding of morality? If Yahweh is the grounding of morality. Same question, pretty much.
Yeah, same question, so same answer. It would just be to say that God is the judge, and so I don't think I wouldn't concede that these are obviously immoral. Extreme, yes. Troubling, I'll be honest, yes. Right, but immoral at the end of the day. I think what you have to do, or for me, the way I think of it is, God. If God is God, if God is the greatest conceivable being, which I think he is, then it's difficult for us to understand, of course, the actions, and like we're not in a position to know. I mean, it's kind of a skeptical theist approach to it, but whether or not it's morally permissible for God to move in judgment on people, even in harsh ways, that seems to me to be plausible.
Gotcha. Good question asks, can a human-made law change while you are following it? Congress can change it, right? Question.
Yes.
I think he's implying that makes it subjective. And so the
But that's
analogy would
why
be
I
if it applies to.
indexed it to a time t and said
Gotcha.
at a particular time, it just is what it is.
Gotcha. Next question is from Kanye Twitty. Is God capable of making a world where evil was not needed?
I think so. God is capable, right? But that would be a world without free creatures, though. So God could have created a world with just physical laws and so on. But I think it's God is not capable of creating a world in which there are free creatures who never go wrong. Is inevitably that a genuinely free person will eventually transgress the moral law.
Gotcha. Next question is from. Good question again. Can God change a law while you are following? Example: don't suffer a witch to live and love your neighbor.
Don't suffer a witch.
The witch paragraphs about where you should stone witches and
Oh,
the inspiration of the
gotcha.
witch things, and he's saying that that would be in conflict with love thy neighbor, and so God can change the laws just like Congress can change the laws, because he was the guy who asked about Congress.
I see. Can God change a law? So I think God can change. This is going to sound a little bit like I'm fudging here, but I'm not trying. I'm not trying to. If it does sound like that, I think that there are like what our obligations are do change throughout the Bible, but I don't think that. In other words, in the Old Testament, as some will know, that there were the whole Mosaic Law. There are plenty of things that we were, or I should say, God's people were obligated to do that in this, sort of today, the view would be that we're not obligated to do it. I don't know that God has changed sort of the moral values there, right? But the exact expression of the moral obligation has changed. And so that can change. But I don't think that loving your neighbor is necessarily in conflict with. I mean, I have to look at the passage to not suffer a witch. I'm not sure what that is there. In fact, I'm just not familiar with it. But I think that loving your neighbor can be consistent with that, though I'd have to do some work on it to make that consistent.
It's Exodus 22:18, I think. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, something along those lines.
I'm
Next
not sure what
question.
that means.
Don't suffer a witch to live. Kill witches. I think that means kill witches, but
I don't think it has to mean kill witches.
System Lord asks, if we're deciding which religion is more moral, then aren't we telling religions what morality is instead of the opposite?
Yeah, perhaps, but that's okay. For me, that's okay, because again, when we are there's us having to figure out what is morally right and morally wrong, and then we have to do the work of right. Then we do the moral ontology work and so on, and that those are not necessarily the same, done in the same time or in the same pursuits. Right? Aren't we telling religions what morality is instead of the opposite? Yeah, I don't think we get morality from religion necessarily. I think that morality is grounded in God, but I think that and the Bible is pretty clear about this, that the law is written on our hearts. Like we know what morality is separate from the Bible, and then I think and religion, theological tradition, and then we take that moral sense of things and evaluate religions.
Gotcha. Next question is from Mr. E. Arthur. Can babies younger than 2 weeks old be deserving of drowning by God's judgment?
Yeah, that would be the hardest part about the flood, I think, the flood account. I don't think so. My own view would be to say that the babies don't deserve to be drowned by God's judgment. but I still think that the whole event is a matter of God's judgment. And so, like I said, it's messy, and it's not. The question is God justified in, let's say, causing the flood? And I think I can see my way clear to say that God is justified in the flood. What happens with the babies? I think, on my own view, the babies would go to be with God for eternity, and that in a way justifies the action. So it's not a judgment of the babies, but it's still the act. The overall act is a judgment act.
Boo Boo Frick says, divine collateral damage, am I right? Travis Statham, can you explain Christianity naturally? I think he means like many apologists argue that the origin and growth of Christianity is better explained by supernatural intervention than natural causes. Can you explain the resurrection story naturally?
I don't think you can well explain it. I don't know if that's the question. Like if there's a plausible explanation of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you can. I think there are ways in which you can possibly explain it that would be natural explanations, and that doesn't bother me at all to admit that. I just think, yeah. So you're right that if this is where the question's coming from, that some apologists way overstate the case. Let's just be honest about that.
That would be a good one to talk about maybe next time.
Yeah.
Which is the more reasonable explanation of the resurrection story. Mr. Monster, thank you for the super chat. If Satan is under God's control and working for God, and God already knows all the outcomes, how could Satan do anything without God's knowledge?
I think God does know. I think that I don't. So let's see. So is Satan under God's control? I would say, in a sense, no. That Satan is also a free creature, and making decisions. So he's not directly under God's control. I think there's a way in which God is still sovereign over all of reality. But I'm a libertarian about freedom, and I think that we make free choices, and I think that any genuine, personal agent, of course, makes free choices. And so in that sense, Satan's not under God's control in this view. How could Satan do anything? Yeah, but God knows, and that's one way to work out his sovereignty, is that God knows what we will do as free creatures, and our free decisions fit into the sovereignty of God and his divine plan for us. And I'd just say the same thing about Satan.
Gotcha. That's not the right one.
That's not a question.
Can he oh no, it's the same one I just read. Is using faith as an epistemology morally wrong, considering how unreliable it can be?
Is using faith and epistemology morally wrong? Yes. Because I don't think faith is an epistemology. I don't think it's a way of knowing. I don't know if it's morally wrong. That's probably a little overstated, but I think that we shouldn't use faith. And of course, this all depends on what we mean by faith here, but we shouldn't use faith as a way of knowing. I think that faith is a way of living. It's actions that we take in light of what we know. And so I place my faith in my wife, let's say, because I know certain things about her, and she's proven herself trustworthy many, 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 many times, and so I have good reason to place my faith in her. And I think a similar thing would go for God, that if, as we come to know the world as his creation, presuming we can come to know the world as his creation and believe that rationally, then at some point we ought to place our faith and live that way, right?
Gotcha. Melody.
No, and I make a real big deal about that with my students and with in print, even in the books, that faith should never be our epistemological way of knowing the world. Like, that's a huge mistake that Christians make.
Gotcha. Melody asked, why did God create Satan?
I don't know.
Nice. Simple answer. Travis asks, how old is the Earth and did we evolve?
I don't know. We definitely evolved. And again, it sounds like I'm dodging here, but I genuinely don't know how old the Earth is. And again, this is more of an intramural debate amongst Christians, probably in some ways, but I think the Earth could be in the universe. Let's not just talk about the Earth, but the universe could be very, very, very old. Just as old as contemporary science says it is, or it could be young if you have. And this is just because I'm trying to be approach this as a theist. I mean, I think if you have God on your view, then like God could have created even 5 minutes ago. And so like it's definitely possible that the Earth is young. And I genuinely don't know, as coming from a Christian theological perspective, I don't know what view I should hold there, or what's the more plausible, rational view. And I don't think it matters. I really don't think the Bible weighs in on the age of the Earth. I think either the so-called old Earth or young Earth view, right? There's good folks on both sides of that from my perspective.
I think it's 4.5 billion is the Earth age right now, consensus. Mr. Monster, thank you for the super chat. If God knows Satan is going to harm a bunch of people who are innocent, maybe even before birth, why doesn't God stop him? Why make humans wait?
Yeah, I think this is, again, one of those really difficult and big questions, but I think it's the book of Job in some ways. And I think that God has plans and purposes in these things that we are not privy to at times. And so we can ask these kind of questions, but we just may not have good answers to them. I think where Job comes out in a way is that he doesn't know why the things happened to him that did, but he has a much clearer and better view of God, and in that way, like God did have a plan and a purpose through it, even though it was horrific for him.
Gotcha. Mr. Creanine asks, how can the Malachim have free will and be merely messengers of his immanence?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, free will, I don't see why, and I'm not sure what it's referring to, but having free will and being a messenger is not inconsistent.
I think the Malachim refer to the angels before the fall, including Satan. And I think the point was that they're jealous of humans because humans have free will or something. That was like the difference between us and them, I think. But not an expert. The Pope of Atheism asks, so if God rolls a dice, does he know where they will land? How does that differ from creating Satan?
Yeah, I think he does. So don't play poker with God is one upshot of that, probably. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, of course he does. If you believe that God is omniscient, then God, he knows what the roll of dice would be. And then the question, how does that differ from creating Satan? I don't think that's a roll of the dice. I think that God knows all decisions of free creatures and sovereignly is sovereign over that, because he knows what they will do and creates a world in which his plans and his purposes are accomplished.
Gotcha. Good question asks, can we repent of our sins in hell and be forgiven? If not, is God infinitely merciful and loving?
I don't think so. I don't think that. Sorry,
to which one of those?
One. Yeah, to the first one. I don't think so. I have no reason to think so. If not, is God infinitely merciful and loving? I think there's another area in which I'm in process on is what to say about hell and kind of its what's the right way to think of it? And honestly, I don't think that the Bible's very clear on it. And so I'm okay saying I don't know about a lot of these, honestly. And so is there a way to work out God's being merciful and loving and there be hell? Yeah, I think so. If that's the question. I think it can be consistent with his mercy and love. The word infinite is one I'm never super comfortable with, because I think infinite means typically unending, and I don't know that God's properties are unending in a real sense. I think the word maximal is better. I think God is maximally merciful and loving. But there's an end to those things. And so even with his knowledge, no, it was his power. Somebody asked about his being able to, something with Satan, I think. Anyway, and I said, no, God's not able to. And I think somebody commented on the stream, like, what? God's not able to? Yeah, like there's an end to God's power, in the sense that he's not infinite in power in the unending sense. He's maximal in power. He can do all things that are logically possible, and to control and constrain a genuinely free agent is not logically possible. And so God, I'm comfortable saying God cannot do that.
The Pope of Atheism asks two questions. If we evolved, then where did original sin come from? And without original sin, why was Jesus' sacrifice necessary?
Yeah, I just think, so we could have evolution. I mean, there's a whole host of views that I think affirm evolution and work in original sin. It could be that God had a kind of like evolution in the full scope of it is the case, and God chose a couple, call them Adam and Eve for the sake of the discussion, and either gave them a human soul or something to that effect. These aren't views necessarily I hold to, but right, these are views that are out there. So I think, again, like a lot of these questions are kind of like, or at least the way I'm reading them is it possible to hold this and that? And I think, yeah, it's possible. Are these, the most plausible views at the end of the day? I don't know. That's just for everybody to sort of figure out. But yeah, there would definitely be ways to work in original sin, it seems to me, with so God choosing the couple, and then they sin, and then that sin spread to their descendants and that sort of thing. I think that's a respectable view.
And the second one is if there was no original sin, did you need Jesus?
Yeah, I kind of think I think we at least we've got textual problems. I think we have problems with, say, Romans 5, where that's pretty squarely affirmed. I mean, it's interesting, right? So like if we didn't have unoriginal sin, like a particular event that we call the original sin, maybe there's a way in which we could still be, morally depraved or morally fallen or something to that effect, that wherein Jesus is, in a sense, needed. I think there's ways to work that out too, but yeah, I think I would agree. Who is it? The atheist pope or something? I think I would, both of atheism. I think I would agree that there's a sense in which if there is no original sin, and we are not fallen. Now, again, that's pretty hypothetical, because I'm pretty convinced that we are quite fallen. It just takes turning on the evening news, right, to sort of know that we're pretty fallen creatures. And so, but if there was not a fall, then I don't know that there's a need for Jesus. But I don't know that there could be free creatures, free moral agents that don't fall. I don't find that plausible at all.
Gotcha. We do have a lot of people saying thank you for coming on. It was a great show. Really appreciate it. I did want to say thank you. I really do appreciate it. It was a great conversation. We have been going for about 2 hours. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
Yeah, sure. So my website is just my name, travisdickinson.com, and you can get links to books and I do a little blogging there, not very consistent, but I try to blog somewhat regularly. I do have a free book available there too on apologetics that somebody can download if they sign up for my newsletter. But yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. But the books can be found at all the, Amazon and wherever else. So
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate
yeah,
it. And I hope you have
thanks.
a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, I had no idea that 2 hours and 15 minutes almost just went by.
Yeah,
That was crazy.
for sure. Time
Yeah,
flies when
so
you're
that's
having
good.
fun, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Talk to you later.